Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. I woke up this morning on a chilly morning in Missouri and decided that we were going to visit the George Washington Carver National Monument. Now, this particular location is one that I have wanted to come to for quite some time, but never quite made it here. I'm really excited to finally have made it, but a few things are looking different in the world right now. And because of that, there are some changes. So let's roll the intro and I'll show you what I'm talking about. As you can see, guys, right now the visitor center, which is right here, is actually closed, but we can still take on the Carver Trail, which is about 3/4 of a mile, and they just asked that we please follow the following rules, which are right here. Nothing too crazy though, so here we go. Let's do a little background information check here since the visitor center is not open. This is George Washington Carver right here, and he was born in the 1860s. He actually passed away in 1943, but before he passed away, he did so many things that are now still beneficial to us to this day. Now, in addition to being recognized by our president, other governments also recognized his efforts in agriculture, and as a result, he actually received a royal title, which I think is really cool. And he was doing all this whenever it was a very difficult time for people in general, and they were needing to figure out ways to be able to change up the way they were doing things so they wouldn't just ruin the land and never be able to use it again. So he was an innovator, he was a scientist, and he was amazing. Now, this sign poses a very good question. Why a national monument? Why? Why a national monument? And there's a very good reason for this. He was a humanitarian. He was a person who gave people hope. It didn't matter what color you were. It didn't matter what economic background you were from. You're benefited from him in some way. When you look around your house today, you probably wouldn't think of George Washington Carver, but you might be surprised how many of the things that you have in your home are a direct connection to this man right here. He was a person who envisioned that we wouldn't have poverty and that you shouldn't have to worry about starving to death, that things should be economical and available. And because of that, he was considered to be a national treasure, which is why we have a national monument for George Washington Carver. Okay, this is a map of the trail we'll be taking today, and as you can see, it makes several different little loops. It's not anything too crazy. It should only take us about 30 minutes to an hour to go around, but we're going to cover the birth site, a statue, another home, and then also what's called the Contemplative Loop Trail. Now, I think this is pretty neat because there's actually a quote here from a 1938 interview that says, "I am up each morning at about 4, and I go outdoors and I look at everything of trees, nature, birds, weeds, grass, insects, flowers. This is my way of communing early in the morning." And I think that that's pretty cool. So that's what we're going to do today. We're just going to take in the views. I'm going to show you a lot of the trail, and we're going to learn about George Washington Carver. As we go along the way, you'll see several of these little stones right here that have different quotes from him, and they line the path as we go down the Carver Trail. Now, much like other national parks, we're looking for these along the trail. These are our key points of interest. They're going to tell us a little bit more about what we're seeing. So in the back, you'll notice we see this little structure, and right here it talks about why this structure was important. Now, the difficult beginnings for George Washington Carver began as a boyhood slave. He was born into a family that had already been purchased and was owned by a family. And some terrible things had happened along the way, and he and his mother were actually separated. And in being separated, he had a Union soldier show him a little bit of mercy and try to go back and reconnect him with his mother. And though it was fruitless, he felt as though that defined to him that he was different and that someone had compassion, and because of that he was challenged to find a better way for future. And so his story begins, a sad story, but a story that began with a little bit of hope. And a little bit of hope, as you all know, can go a long way. He would have been born in a home about this size, guys. This is tiny. And he wasn't the first child. He was the second. So 3 at least people living in this small box of a home right here. We now press onward on the trail and move toward the next structure. As you can see here, there is actually an overlook right in this direction, but right now it is temporarily closed. They are doing a little bit of maintenance out here, and so that should be open by the time that you all come out. Meanwhile, we're going to take the Carver Trail, and there I am right there. Hi guys. Now as we're walking out here, I'm sure you can hear it. There are so many birds chattering and squirrels squawking and just so many cool natural sounds. Everything's so alive out here, and it just makes for a pleasurable, enjoyable walk. Wow. Now it's said that George Washington Carver would walk through the woods and find beautiful plants, and he would collect them. And then he would take them to his secret hiding place, his own private secret garden. And he would cultivate it, and he would watch it grow, and he would learn about the plants that he had there. And over time, this passion became obsession, and this obsession became creativity. And this creativity inspired so much to happen in his life in later years. So I just think that that is so neat that a boy could start off doing something like that, and it would turn into something that would change the way the rest of us live our lives today. It's so inspiring. You don't have to be an adult to do something awesome. And I think so many times that we overlook the creativity of a child. So maybe we should start looking at those kids just a little bit different when they come up to us with a harebrained idea. Carver also turned to those same plants to help out those in need who were sick and might not have been able to afford conventional medicines. He was able to treat everything from a common cold to aches and pains, and everything in between, just by learning the properties of the plants around him and listening to nature. And helping meant saving lives in some cases. This spring was actually the closest drinking water to the Carver household in the 1860s. According to George, he was too frail to work in the field, and his guardian, Sarah Carver, actually gave him many household chores to do, including drawing water from this spring. As a typical young boy, George frequently stopped to play in the water. I think at this time we're just going to look at some of the beauty around us and see just exactly what George Washington Carver would have experienced. Now, it is kind of a wintry month, so not everything is alive and blossoming like it would have been in spring or summer, but there's still beauty to be had. And I think that we're just going to appreciate that for a moment. Now, as we continue to advance down the trail, I think this is a great time for us to talk about just how many things George Washington Carver went on to invent in life. Over 300 products or a derivative of peanuts from his inventions. That's why a lot of people know him as the official Mr. Peanut, long before the Planters Peanuts, guys. So I think that's pretty cool in itself. But what were those products? Things you would never ever imagine. There's the obvious ones like peanut butter and things like that, things that you eat. But did you know that you could also make cosmetics, auto supplies, things like that out of peanuts, and even paper? Yep, he literally took something that a lot of people thought was just a throwaway and turned it into so many useful things. And because of that, peanut cropping became a big deal. It was no longer just thought to be something that was like, okay, whatever. But then it became something that was affordable and a big deal for those who didn't necessarily have the biggest farms, the biggest means. And that was just the start. He also had inventions that were related to other things like sweet potatoes and some of the other crops that you could find. It's pretty amazing to know that he came up with all these ideas just out of nowhere. Okay guys, we have now reached the contemplative loop, and it is right here. This is a 1/4 mile around the water, and along the way we see this sign up here. Let's go learn a little bit more. It says here that George Washington Carver spoke openly about his faith in God, and that faith began when he was just a mere boy. It says here that at 10 years old that God just came into his heart. He was shelling corn, and one of his neighbors about his same age came in on Saturday morning and started talking and playing and telling him about Sunday school and what they did. And it was at that time that he said his very first prayer. He said that he recalled that it felt so good that he prayed. And sometimes he prayed several times a day because it felt just so good. Now he goes on to say in several of his quotes around the park, as well as the information you can find online, that that's what carried him through some of the most difficult times of his life. And it gave him hope. And again, we reference hope, but all it takes is vision and hope to make something great. Now you might notice, guys, this is not the same as the other part of the path. The other part of the path is definitely paved. This is the one section of the trail that is not. So it is hard packed, but it's also dirt, so it can get a little bit muddy out here sometimes. Now you might notice along the contemplative trail, as well as other portions of the trail, you'll find benches so you can take in the views, hear the sounds of nature, and enjoy what it is that we're out here for. And I think that that's really great. It allows lots of people to come out, it allows you to take your time, and it makes it for a moment where you can have those quiet moments of contemplation also, just like George Washington Carver did. Now, up at the statue, you'll notice that there were a lot of benches kind of in a circular area. They actually do ranger talks there to tell the story of George Washington Carver, and you can check on the website to see if those are available whenever you're visiting. Each of the stones that we find have a topic in the upper left-hand corner. And you'll see this one right here is all about helping. This is a quote from 1929. He says here, "My idea is to help the man farthest down. This is why I have made every process just as simple as I could to put it within reach." Closer. More and more as we come closer and closer in touch with nature and its teachings, we are able to see the divine, and therefore fitted to interpret correctly the various languages spoken by all forms of nature about us. George Washington Carver, February 1930. Now on the channel, I know I take you guys to a lot of really cool attractions and fun things that are inside. But one of my favorite things to do on the channel is get out here into nature and enjoy it. It's amazing what you can find when you just explore a little bit. And so seeing someone who was so in tune with nature and hearing his words of wisdom is just so heartwarming right now. I think that more of us need to get outside and stretch our legs and explore and enjoy those special spaces that are there, because as time passes, those spaces become more and more limited. So I encourage you guys, I challenge you guys to find one outdoor space near you and get out and explore it. And then leave me a comment or send me an email and tell me what you did. I'd love to hear about your adventures. So with that said, let's continue this one. Now here we learn that this pond actually was not here whenever he was here. He explored the waters around the property in other areas, but this was actually just a spring. The later owners actually dammed it so that it would make this pond. And down at the end over there, we can see where the original spring fed through and portions of the original spring house. Now, as you recall from some of our other adventures, a spring house was a very necessary piece of equipment for the early homes. That was the way that they would be able to get cool all of their things. So it was basically like a refrigerator. And so that would have been the refrigerator down there. And now we press onward and over toward, I don't know if you can see it, but right over here, there is actually a home. So we're gonna follow the path and find out a little bit more. Now, despite the visitor center being closed, this building is open. They just ask that you socially distance if there's more than one group of people out here at a time. And so we're going in. Now in this structure we can learn a little bit more about George Washington Carver and the family that actually lived here. First question, did he actually grow up in this house? No, he did not. He was born in the cabin that we showed the footprint of up on top of the hill. But he did interact in this home. So there's several different facts that we can learn here and a little bit about what it took to settle the land at the time. So let's go around and learn a little bit and see a few of the things that are behind the case in the other room. Right here are a list of popular questions that people ask when coming here, including when did he visit this home? Were Moses and Susan Carver, the owner of this home, his actual parents? Is this an original house? Is this house at his original location? Was the house moved? How old is the house? And why is the upstairs closed to visitors? And to answer just a couple of those, yes, this is the original house. No, this is not the original location. They aren't exactly sure how the house was moved or where it was originally placed, but the house itself is authenticated as the original house. They have gone in and done some improvement simply because they needed to make it safe. They've also added, for example, the little fire extinguisher over here to make it again safe. The upstairs is not available. This is pretty common with coming to historic structures. I've noticed that at most of the places that I go, you can't go upstairs. And there's a variety of different reasons. But here, it appears that the upstairs floor has not been significantly reinforced because they did want to keep as much of the structure as they could the way that it was. And also, the staircase is very narrow and not the most sturdy. So while they do have access to it for emergency needs, we as the general public cannot go up there, and that's okay. We can still see enough of the house to make it make sense. And last but not least, how old is this house? They believe that this house was actually constructed in 1881. So it's really old, guys. Now here we learn a little bit more about settling the land. And it says here that Moses and Susan actually settled in the mid to late 1830s, but they had brothers and other family members who were living on the property as well. Now the Carver family lived on the property for over 60 years farming. They selected this particular slice of heaven because it had the woods, the streams, and some area where they could also cultivate crops that was very flat. And from there, that is how we get to the point where George Washington Carver came upon this property. Now notice, George Washington Carver's last name is Carver, but that's because at the time slaves took the owner's name, and so he didn't get to choose his last name. That's something that throughout history I think we need to talk a little bit more about. A lot of people didn't have last names that were their own. They had someone else's. And even through that, he took that name and he made it famous, basically. But he was not actually related to the people who lived here. Okay guys, right here we have an actual timeline, and it starts off at 1830 whenever they settled this property and goes all the way up to 1950. Now along this timeline we find several different photos, including this one of the Carver house. The Carver house is of course where we're standing right now. Here is George Washington Carver at the Tuskegee Institute, and this was in 1890. And then also, if we look over here, we see him at Iowa State College. And so we can see not only the timeline of the home itself, but also of George Washington Carver. He actually has a point right here in the 1940s that documents whenever he passed away, and then where he is buried. We can actually find George Washington Carver at the Tuskegee Institute campus, and he was buried there after 47 years of service. Now right here we can see an actual photo from the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. This photo was taken in 1902. These are agriculture students that are harvesting sweet potatoes, and it tells a little bit more about what the farm to classroom might have looked like. So as I'm telling you about this, I want to show you where they might have farmed here at the Carver homestead. It says here that the Moses Carver family grew hundreds of bushels of oats, hay, corn, and Irish potatoes. They were grown in these fields right here. Now, after growing up around this, George Washington Carver wanted to teach about the benefits of these natural services that could be rendered, but he had to start from scratch at the Tuskegee Institute. So he was able to do that, and for 46 years went on to influence students by teaching them agriculture from the very meager beginnings all the way up to whenever they could take that agriculture and turn it into other things. I think that's pretty awesome, guys. I think that that is definitely neat, that a field like this would inspire him to educate others on such a large level. Now, these are some of the bulletins that might have been available to those who were learning from him. You can see here how to grow the peanut and 105 ways for preparing it for human consumption, how to grow the tomato and 115 ways to prepare it for the table, nature's garden for victory and peace. Really awesome things here, and again, all had their beginnings on this farm. And right here we actually see him instructing a class. This was a short session, only 2 weeks, but he was teaching people how to farm in a way that would bring about larger growth in their crops and also more sustainability. But don't think that George Washington Carver's talent stopped with merely inventing. He also was an established painter. And here you can find that he actually discovered that Alabama clays produced beautiful, long-lasting pigments. And he began to use those pigments and his love for chemistry to create paints and dyes. Now, many of Carver's paintings reflected the scenes that he had grown to love in nature, and he resorted back to those memories of his childhood for some of his most popular works. But just to know that he found the land to once again give back for something that he was passionate about is just really neat. He was literally the man who just kept on and kept on and kept on with talent. There was no stopping him. Now, along the path, I did meet one of the rangers, and he told me that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about George Washington Carver, the video that typically plays in the visitor center is available on YouTube. So I definitely encourage you guys to deep dive a little bit more to fill in some of the blanks that I've left for you. It's a fascinating man with a wonderful legacy. And there's so many stories that link back to his work while he was not only here, but also in Alabama. Okay guys, this is the final marker of the park. Now here we can find the graves of Susan and Moses Carver. These were the two that actually ended up raising George following him being orphaned. And inside here we find several other graves as well from other families from this area. And one of the things that we'll note while we're looking at this is the last gravestone was actually put here in 1919. So still within the 19th century, but well past the 1830s when Moses and Susan were here. And this wall is actually just a reconstruction of the original wall, so it was built in the same fashion. Looks like just a pile of rocks, but they are all strategically placed, so they are very strong and secure. Here they are, guys. This is Susan and Moses Carver. Now, something I wanted to share with you guys before we head back and call it a day. History during this time is not super well documented in some cases. So many of the stories that we are being able to find today have been based on accounts from either people who have handed down stories or from George Washington Carver's accounts that he had given over the years. So as we've gone to each one of these plaques and it's given us quotes and told little pieces, these have all come from those resources. Now, I really think that it's fitting that when we're hiking this is where we end, because this is the end of one chapter of George Washington Carver's life, but the beginning of another. He went on after living here and did many great things, and so stopping here is definitely where I think the story should conclude. Now, there are a few other George Washington Carver areas that we can visit across the United States, and I'm hoping to share those with you in a future video. But for now, if you have enjoyed hiking around the George Washington Carver National Monument, I do hope that you will leave a like on this. And again, answer that challenge. Get outside, do something, explore, learn, and appreciate the nature that's around us. Until next time, guys. Bye!